If someone had asked me back then, I would have said my marriage was solid. Not perfect, but steady in the way most people hope for after 10 years together. Mark was dependable, polite to everyone, and strangely proud of being the good husband type. He'd mow the lawn before sunrise on Saturdays, text me when he was stuck in traffic, and never forgot to pick up my favorite coffee creamer. It all looked normal. Safe, predictable. Every Friday night, he'd tell me the same thing. "I'm heading to Parker tomorrow morning. Gonna check on Mom and Dad, make sure the house is okay." I'd nod, hand him a grocery list for them, and watch him pack the trunk with things like oatmeal, orange juice, and those multivitamins his mom liked. It became our weekend rhythm, the kind of routine that feels comforting until you realize it's hiding something else. Linda, my mother-in-law, was the kind of woman who called you sweetheart, but corrected your grammar in the same breath. We got along fine. She liked me, or at least pretended to. I always thought Mark's visits were sweet proof that he still cared about his parents. He'd come home around 6, smelling faintly of her cinnamon rolls, and say, "Mom asked about you," like it was proof he'd been there. There wasn't a single reason to doubt him. Until there was. It started with something stupid, just a gas receipt. I was cleaning out the glove compartment of his car before taking it to the shop. The receipt said Denver, not Parker. Same date, same time he said he was visiting his parents. I almost threw it away. Denver was only 40 minutes from Parker, and people make stops. But something about it stuck. The total was $68.32, premium gas. He never used premium. I told myself not to read into it. I was tired, maybe overthinking, but that tiny seed of doubt didn't go away. It started showing up in small ways: how I noticed the smell of a new cologne I hadn't bought him, how he started wearing nicer shirts on Saturdays. When I mentioned it, he laughed. "I'm around Mom all day, she's allergic to my usual one." That made sense. Everything he said made sense. But my gut didn't buy it. The next weekend, while packing his groceries, I noticed him double-checking his phone over and over. When I asked what was wrong, he said, "Work's been crazy. They might call about the new solar project." He kissed my forehead, loaded the car, and drove off with his usual calm. By noon, I was scrolling through Facebook, half bored, when I saw a post from his company page, a photo of a Frontier Solar Community Outreach event held that same morning in Denver. Mark wasn't in the photo, but the timing was too close. He'd never mentioned going to Denver for work. When he came home that evening, everything about him looked ordinary. He set his keys on the counter, grabbed a beer, and asked, "You good?" Like nothing in the world had changed. I nodded. "How's your mom?" "She's fine, her knee's acting up again. Dad wants to redo the deck." He said it so smoothly it was almost art. And for a moment, I actually felt guilty for doubting him. That's what betrayal feels like in its early form. It's quiet, polite. You start apologizing to yourself for noticing the truth. That night, while folding laundry, I found an ATM receipt in his jeans, $600 withdrawn. The memo line said, "Mom's house repairs." I almost laughed out loud. Mark hadn't fixed anything at his parents' house since the Obama administration. Still, I didn't confront him. Not yet. Part of me needed more than a gut feeling. I needed proof so solid, it would make even him doubt his own lies. It's strange how routines become cages. Every Saturday after that, I watched him leave, wave, and drive away. I'd count the hours, imagine him sitting at his parents' kitchen table, eating soup and talking about weather. But when he returned, there were no leftovers, no stories, just a calm distance that felt like a locked door. One night, I woke up and found him downstairs, typing something on his laptop. When I asked what he was doing, he said, "Just work reports. Go back to sleep." But I caught the reflection of a smile he didn't mean to show. That's when I knew. I didn't know what it was yet, but I knew something had already started to rot. Maybe that's the worst part about betrayal. It doesn't break you all at once. It leaks. It seeps in like water under a door, quiet but unstoppable. Still, I smiled. I packed his groceries every week. I said, "Drive safe," and meant it. Because the truth has a way of surfacing when you stop chasing it. And it was coming faster than he thought. Before we go further, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had that one moment when something small, a text, a receipt, a strange tone, made you realize your gut was right all along? Tell me in the comments. I read every one of them. And if you love true cheating stories, revenge stories, and husband betrayal stories, hit subscribe. You'll want to stay for what comes next. He said he was visiting his parents. I believed him. But that belief wouldn't last much longer. That Sunday morning, I sat across from Mark at the kitchen table, pretending to scroll through my phone while my coffee went cold. The air felt heavier than usual, like even the walls were waiting for something. He was reading the sports section, humming under his breath, completely at ease. I wanted to ask about the receipt, about Denver, but instead I said, "Did your mom ever fix that deck?" He didn't look up. Not yet. You know my dad takes forever to start anything. I watched him for a beat too long, and maybe he felt it, because he finally looked up and smiled. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "You just seem tired lately." He leaned back in his chair, all casual charm. "Yeah, well, between work and family, there's a lot going on. Don't start worrying, Em." It was the kind of line you throw out when you want to sound honest without actually being it. That week, things felt off. He came home late twice, once smelling like beer and cologne. The other time with that faint trace of hotel soap, the kind you only find in those chain business hotels off the highway. When I asked, he said he'd been at the plant expansion site in Colorado Springs. By Wednesday, I decided I wasn't imagining it. My body knew before my brain caught up. His hugs got shorter, his phone stayed face down, and our conversations started to sound like work meetings. I tried to talk myself down. Marriages go through quiet seasons, right? Maybe I was overreacting. But that Friday, while sorting laundry, his phone buzzed on the counter. A text preview flashed. "Drive safe tomorrow." Just a winking face. No name. No context. When he came downstairs, I asked, "Who's checking on your safety tomorrow?" He froze for a fraction of a second, barely visible, but I caught it. Then he laughed. "It's just Tanya from work. She's managing logistics for the solar pilot project. Relax." "Tanya?" "Yeah, she's new. Smart girl. You'd like her." There was something in the way he said girl, not woman, that made my stomach turn. He reached over, touched my arm. "Em, come on. You can't start assuming things every time someone texts me. It's exhausting." That line stuck in my head all night. It's exhausting. As if his lies were a burden I was making him carry. The next morning, he left early again. I sat on the couch, staring at his empty coffee mug, trying to decide whether to be the trusting wife or the fool. The line between them felt thinner by the hour. Around noon, Jenna stopped by. She'd been my best friend since college, the kind of person who always told you the truth, even when you didn't want to hear it. I told her about the texts, the receipts, the lies that didn't sound like lies until you looked closely. She listened, sipping her tea, eyes narrowed. "Emily, you've always trusted him more than you should. But if something feels wrong, it probably is." I wanted her to be wrong. I wanted someone to tell me I was just paranoid. Later that evening, Mark came home carrying takeout. "Didn't feel like cooking," he said, setting the bags down. His tone was too light. "Thought I'd surprise you." It was Thai food, my favorite. I almost hated that he remembered. We ate in silence for a while. Then he started talking about how hard things had been at work, how stressed he was, how people didn't appreciate how much effort he put in. It was like he was writing himself a sympathy script. At one point, he reached for my hand. "I know I've been distant lately. I'm sorry. You're the best thing that ever happened to me." For a second, I almost believed him. His voice was soft, his eyes steady. But then I noticed his wedding ring was off. I hadn't seen it all evening. "Where's your ring?" I asked. He glanced down at his hand and smiled. "Oh, I left it by the sink earlier. Took it off to fix that faucet drip. I'll grab it later." The faucet had been fine for months. That night, after he fell asleep, I walked to the kitchen and checked the sink. No ring, no tools, just an empty counter and the sound of the fridge humming like nothing was wrong. It's amazing how silence can feel like proof. The next morning, I watched him get ready for another trip to Parker. He looked sharp, too sharp. Fresh haircut, pressed shirt, new leather shoes. He kissed my cheek, told me he loved me, and drove off like always. I waited 15 minutes before pulling up our joint bank account on my laptop. There it was again, another cash withdrawal. $600. Same pattern. I clicked through older transactions. One entry stood out: Frontier Solar, event supplies, $450. That was strange. He never handled event budgets. Something inside me flipped. Not anger. Not yet. Just this cold, clear focus. I printed every transaction from the last 3 months, slipped the pages into a folder, and put it in my desk drawer. That afternoon I texted Jenna, "If I find something, I need you to promise you'll tell me to stay calm." She replied, "You won't stay calm, but you'll stay smart." That line made me laugh for the first time in days. When Mark came home that evening, I noticed his hands trembling as he poured wine. Not fear adrenaline. He was living a double life, and the thrill of it was keeping him alive. I watched him, every movement, every word. He asked, "You okay? You're quiet tonight." I smiled. "I'm good. Just thinking about how much I trust you." He looked relieved, like I'd just handed him a second chance he didn't deserve. And right then I decided I wasn't going to confront him yet. Not until I had everything. Every dollar, every lie, every detail. I'd been the wife who believed. Now I was going to be the woman who knew. The next Saturday, I didn't pack his groceries. I just watched him do it himself, the way he checked every bag twice, making sure everything looked perfect before leaving. He kissed my forehead like he always did, but this time I didn't lean in. I watched the car pull out of the driveway and disappear down the street, then wrote down the time, 9:12 a.m. For the first time in years, I didn't fill my day with chores or errands. I sat on the couch, staring at the folder of bank statements in my desk drawer. Every transaction was a breadcrumb leading somewhere I didn't want to go. I just didn't know how far I was willing to follow it yet. By afternoon, I gave up pretending I wasn't restless. I grabbed my coat and headed to the farmer's market. I ran into Jenna near the flower stalls. She was picking out tulips, the same ones she'd always said were happy flowers. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "I haven't," I admitted. "He left again this morning." She raised an eyebrow. "And you stayed?" "For now." She sighed, the kind of sigh that meant she wanted to tell me to walk away but knew I wasn't ready. "You'll know when it's time." I envied her certainty, because at that point, I didn't know what was worse, being wrong or being right. When I got home, I noticed something strange. The trash can in the garage had been emptied, even though trash pickup wasn't until Tuesday. He'd taken out the garbage before leaving. Mark never remembered trash day. It was one of those little things that made me pause. People lie about big things, but they also start covering their tracks in small ways. That night, I tried calling Linda, his mom. "Hey," I said, keeping my tone casual. "Did Mark make it down there today?" "Oh no, honey," she said cheerfully. "He called earlier to say he wasn't feeling great, said he might come next week instead." I nearly dropped the phone. "He said he wasn't feeling well?" "Yes, poor thing. You know how he pushes himself at work. Tell him to rest, okay?" I stared at the wall after we hung up, my chest tight. I didn't know whether to cry or laugh. He was good. Too good. By Sunday morning, my suspicion had turned into something sharper. I started noticing every inconsistency, how his stories didn't line up, how he said, "I'll be home by 6, but never showed up until after 8, how he suddenly started locking his phone. When I tried to talk about it, he flipped it back on me. "Emily, you've been acting strange lately. You need to stop reading into everything." Gaslighting works best when it sounds gentle. That week, I met with an old coworker for coffee, Sarah, who worked at a local architecture firm that had done consulting work with Frontier Solar. I asked casually, "Do you know a Tanya West?" She frowned, thinking. "Tanya? Yeah, she's in marketing, right? I saw her at the Denver outreach event a few weeks ago. She and one of the project managers seemed close." My stomach tightened. "Which project manager?" Sarah stirred her coffee slowly, avoiding my eyes. "I think his name was Mark." "Mark Cooper. Why?" I smiled tightly. "Just wondering. When I got home that night, he was already there, humming while making dinner like a man with nothing to hide. The smell of garlic filled the air. It was the kind of evening that looked perfect from the outside. The kind people post online with captions like, "My favorite kind of night." He poured me a glass of wine. "You okay? You've been quiet lately." "I'm fine," I said. "Just tired." He grinned. "You worry too much. You always have." That was his favorite line, the one he used whenever he needed to make me feel irrational. I took a sip of wine and said nothing. After dinner, he went upstairs to shower. I picked up his phone from the counter. Locked. Of course. I turned it over in my hands for a second, then placed it back exactly where it was. Not yet. When he came back down, he kissed my cheek again. "You know I love you, right?" I smiled. "I know. But love isn't proof. It's a weapon when used by someone who knows exactly how much you want to believe them." The next day, I couldn't focus at work. I kept replaying everything Sarah said. I opened my laptop and searched Frontier Solar's LinkedIn page. There she was, Tanya West, smiling next to a company banner, captioned, "Proud to support sustainable communities in Denver." I clicked on her profile. Public photos, events, comments from coworkers, including one from Mark. "Couldn't have done it without your dedication, Tanya." I closed the laptop before my pulse could get any faster. That evening, I told Jenna. She looked at me with that mix of anger and sympathy only a best friend can manage. "Emily, this isn't a misunderstanding anymore." "I know," I said. "But if I accuse him now, he'll just twist it. I need something he can't talk his way out of." She nodded. "Then get it." I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake listening to the soft hum of the ceiling fan, counting the hours until morning. At 5 a.m., when he stirred beside me, I kept my eyes closed and listened as he got ready, his movements calm, rehearsed. The sound of the garage door opening felt like a gun being cocked. After he left, I got in my car and drove first toward Parker, then veering off onto the highway that led to Denver. The sky was pale gray, the kind that makes you feel like the world's holding its breath. Halfway there, I stopped at a gas station and sat in the car, my hands gripping the steering wheel. I wasn't sure what I'd do if I saw something, but I knew I couldn't keep pretending. Somewhere between Boulder and Denver, I realized this wasn't about catching him anymore. It was about seeing him for who he really was. And once you see, you can't unsee. The Monday after my silent drive toward Denver, I sat across from Mark at breakfast, watching him butter his toast like a man without a single secret. He smiled at me between bites, asking about my work week, my clients, the things husbands ask when they're trying too hard to sound normal. I smiled back and asked nothing. The silence between us wasn't cold anymore, it was calculated. By midweek, the gaslighting started to take shape. He came home one evening with flowers, a random bouquet of lilies from the grocery store. "You've been tense lately," he said, setting them down. "I don't know what's going on with you, but I'm not the enemy here." That line, "I'm not the enemy," landed like a dare. Because people who aren't the enemy don't usually need to say it out loud. Later that night, I found him in his office, typing something on his laptop. I leaned against the doorframe. "Working late?" He looked up, startled, then relaxed. "Yeah. Reports for the board. We're expanding the Frontier Solar pilot program into northern Colorado." I nodded, though I already knew that wasn't true. I'd checked the company's public project updates earlier. There was no mention of a northern expansion, just the same Denver outreach event from a few weeks before. When I didn't respond, he said softly, "Emily, are we okay?" "We're fine," I said. "Why wouldn't we be?" He smiled, but his eyes searched mine. It was the look of a man trying to figure out how much I knew. The next morning, I checked our shared email inbox, the one we used for bills. A new message had come in from our bank, another withdrawal. $4,500. The note read, "Frontier Solar Fund." I stared at the screen, reading it over and over. It wasn't from his company account, it was from ours. Whatever he was doing, he was using our money to do it. I printed the transaction, added it to the folder, and slipped it behind a stack of tax papers in my desk. That night, he poured us both a glass of wine and said, "We need to talk." The words were usually mine, but he said them first. I feel like you've been distant lately, he continued. You don't trust me anymore, and I don't know what I did to deserve that. It was almost impressive the way he managed to sound both hurt and innocent at the same time. I'm fine, I said, keeping my voice even. He shook his head, setting down the glass. No, you're not. You've been checking my phone, haven't you? I blinked. Why would you think that? Because I can feel it, he said. You're suspicious all the time. You look at me like you're waiting for me to mess up. He leaned closer, voice softening. I don't want to live like this, Emily. You're my wife. We're supposed to be a team. If I hadn't known better, I might have believed him. But I'd seen how he changed when he realized I wasn't reacting to his stories the same way anymore. He was testing me, pushing boundaries to see if I'd break. The following Friday, he came home later than usual, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. I was sitting in the living room, TV off, lights low. He stopped at the doorway, caught off guard. You're still up? Yeah, I said. Couldn't sleep. He loosened his tie, pretending not to notice the silence stretching between us. It's been a long day. We had to meet with investors in Denver. Denver, I repeated. He froze just enough to tell me I'd hit the right nerve. Yeah, is that a problem? No, I said lightly. Just curious. He nodded slowly, then forced a laugh. You're acting like I'm having an affair or something. I met his eyes. Are you? He laughed again, louder this time. God, Emily, that's ridiculous. You've got to stop letting your imagination run wild. Ham! And that was it, the moment the game truly began. Every question I asked became proof that I was paranoid. Every truth I noticed was rewritten into an insecurity. He turned my logic into hysteria and my suspicion into guilt. The next morning, he suggested we go to brunch to reset. We sat in a small cafe downtown, all smiles for the waitress, like two actors in a show neither of us wanted to star in. He reached across the table, held my hand, and said, You know, I miss us. Oh, you miss me? I asked. Of course, he said. I hate that we're not on the same page. I'm doing all this work so our future's secure, and you can't even see it. He was good, smooth, but he overplayed it. People who lie for a living forget how much truth weighs when it's gone. When we got home, he went upstairs to shower. I stood by the kitchen counter, staring at the vase of lilies he'd given me earlier in the week. Their petals were starting to curl and brown around the edges. For some reason, I couldn't stop looking at them. They looked like the kind of beauty that pretends to last. That evening, I made a quiet decision. I wasn't going to let him rewrite me into the villain of my own life. I sat down at my desk, opened my laptop, and started a new folder labeled Proof. Inside it, I saved everything: the receipts, the bank records, even a photo of the ATM slips I'd found. Then I made an appointment with a private investigator. His name was Paul Grant, a former police detective turned independent consultant. When he picked up, his voice was calm and unhurried. What kind of situation are we talking about? He asked. Financial and personal, I said. I think my husband's lying about where he goes every weekend, and I need to know where the money's going. He paused, then said, If he's lying, we'll find out. But once we do, you'll have to decide what you're really after: proof or peace. I didn't answer right away. Maybe because I wasn't sure yet. Both, I finally said. I want both. The next Saturday, Mark left at 9:07 a.m., 5 minutes earlier than usual. I watched him from the window until his car turned the corner. Then I called Paul. Follow the black Tacoma, I said quietly. He says he's going to Parker. He didn't even ask which direction that was. Got it, he said. Let's see where he really ends up. And for the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: control. The next Saturday started like all the others, except for the way my heartbeat didn't match the calm of the morning. Mark moved around the kitchen, loading groceries into reusable bags while humming to himself. The performance was perfect: casual, routine, almost comforting. He kissed my forehead and said, Be back by dinner. Mom's craving your banana bread. This time, I didn't bake. I waited until his taillights disappeared down the street, then grabbed my keys. My hands shook a little as I drove, not from nerves but from something colder: certainty. The road from Boulder to Parker curved through pine hills and neighborhoods so clean they almost looked staged. The farther I went, the more that certainty hardened. If I was wrong, I'd apologize. If I was right, I'd never look back. When I turned onto his parents' street, the driveway was empty. I parked a few houses down and waited for a minute, trying to convince myself he might show up any second. But nothing moved except a sprinkler across the lawn. I took a deep breath and rang the bell. Linda opened the door, wearing an apron and that soft smile she reserved for people she liked. "Emily! What a surprise! Where's Mark?" My throat tightened. "I thought he was here." Her brow furrowed. "No, he called this morning, said he wasn't coming, said he had a project meeting in Denver." For a second, all I heard was the faint buzz of the refrigerator behind her. Then, I smiled politely, the way women do when their world just tilted, but they don't want anyone to notice. "Oh, right," I said, pretending I'd forgotten. "Must have mixed up the days." She laughed lightly, wiping her hands on her apron. "You know men never clear about their schedules." "Yeah," I said. "I'm starting to notice." I chatted with her for a few minutes, smiling through small talk that tasted like metal. When I left, she handed me a Tupperware of cookies and said, "Tell him to call his mother more often." I nodded, got in the car, and drove until her house was a blur in the rearview mirror. My hands clenched the steering wheel until my knuckles whitened. He hadn't been there in weeks. Maybe months. At a stoplight, I opened the GPS app on my phone. It was connected to his location history, something we'd set up years ago for safety when he traveled for work. I'd never used it. Until now. The pin blinked in Denver. Near Cherry Creek. Not Parker. Not even close. My mouth went dry. I zoomed in until the map showed a residential street lined with modern townhouses, neat and symmetrical. My chest felt too small for my lungs. I followed the route without thinking, every turn mechanical, every mile sharper than the last. When I reached the street, I parked half a block away. His truck was there, the same black Tacoma with a dented tailgate and a faded Frontier Solar decal. I didn't need to see more, but I looked anyway. Through the townhouse window, I saw movement, a figure in a pale blouse, blonde hair pulled into a loose bun. She laughed at something. Then Mark walked into view, barefoot, carrying a mug. He leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't quick or awkward. It was familiar. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel until I could feel the pulse in my palms. The world didn't end in explosions or betrayal speeches. It ended quietly, in a parking spot outside a townhouse where your husband kisses someone else like it's the most normal thing in the world. After a few minutes, I started the car. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like me. It looked like someone who had outgrown her own life. Halfway home, I stopped for gas. The attendant asked, "You okay, ma'am?" I forced a smile, just low on fuel. It was the truest thing I'd said all day. When I got home, I didn't go inside right away. I sat in the driveway, staring at the house we'd built. Every flower pot, every framed picture, suddenly felt like evidence of a lie. Inside, the groceries he'd left behind were still on the counter. A carton of eggs, milk, and a loaf of bread. I put everything away mechanically, one item at a time, like my body needed the illusion of normalcy. When he came home that evening, the lie was seamless. He walked in with his usual calm, set down his keys and said, "Mom's knee's better, thank God." Day. I turned from the sink and met his eyes. "That's good." He smiled, relaxed, kissed my cheek. "You okay?" "Perfect," I said. "Dinner's almost ready." The next morning, while he showered, I checked the passenger seat of his car. A folded receipt sat under a coffee cup. Denver Interiors and Home Decor. Paid in cash. Signature, Tanya West. My hand didn't even shake when I took a photo of it. That's when I realized the difference between suspicion and truth. Suspicion burns, truth freezes. When he came downstairs, humming as he buttoned his shirt, I smiled at him. The same soft, loving smile I'd given him for years. "Drive safe," I said. He kissed my forehead again. "Always do." This time, I believed him, just not in the way he meant it. The following Saturday, the morning light felt sharper, like the world was conspiring to make everything too visible. Mark moved around the kitchen as usual, cheerful and relaxed, humming off-key while checking his phone. He wore the same gray jacket I'd seen hanging on the coat rack in that Denver townhouse window. I didn't need more proof, but I wanted to see it with my own eyes this time, up close. When he left, I didn't wait. I called Paul, the investigator. "He's on the move," I said quietly. "Same pattern? Same exact time." "Got it. I'll tail him," he said. "Stay put." But I didn't. Sitting at home, waiting for a phone call, suddenly felt unbearable. So I grabbed my keys and followed from a distance, staying far enough behind that he'd never notice. The drive took me down the same route past the split highway toward Denver, then into that neighborhood I already knew too well. His truck turned into the same townhouse complex. I parked on the next street, behind a hedge that gave me a partial view of the house. My pulse felt steady, detached, like I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times. At 10:46, the door opened. Tanya stepped out, dressed casually in jeans and a soft blue sweater. She looked younger up close, probably early 30s, with that polished confidence people get when life has been kind to them. She turned, smiled, and a moment later, Mark appeared. He handed her a travel mug, brushed her arm, and kissed her before walking toward his truck. It was the kind of kiss that didn't belong to just coworkers. He drove off, and she waved as if it was routine. Because it was. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the house like it could answer a single question. How long had it been going on? When I finally started the car, I didn't cry or scream. I drove back to Boulder with the same calm precision that had kept me functioning for weeks. People think anger is loud. It isn't. Real anger is quiet. It watches, it remembers, it builds. That evening, Paul called. "He's been in Denver every Saturday for the last month," he said. "Never Parker. Always that address." I almost laughed. "You don't say." "I've got photos, timestamps, video. Do you want me to keep following him?" "No," I said. "That's enough." The next morning, I made pancakes like I always did on Sundays. Mark came down wearing his favorite college sweatshirt, kissed me on the cheek, and said, "Something smells amazing." He ate like nothing was wrong, like he hadn't just come home from another woman's house. Between bites, he told me a story about how his mom wanted to repaint her kitchen. I watched his face carefully, every blink and pause rehearsed to perfection. "That's nice," I said. "What color?" He hesitated. "Ooh, beige. You know, neutral." "Beige?" I smiled faintly. "She hates beige." He froze for a second, then recovered. "Well, she's trying new things. I'll bet." He didn't notice the edge in my tone. He kept talking about his parents, his job, the project in Denver that didn't exist. I realized then that he was comfortable because he thought I was predictable. After breakfast, he grabbed his jacket and said, "I've got to stop by the office. The guys are running weekend maintenance." "Of course," I said. "Be safe." As soon as the door shut, I opened the drawer in the entry table and pulled out the folder labeled Proof. Inside were photos, receipts, and copies of every transaction linked to that address. I flipped through the pages slowly, then added the final piece, the photo of him and Tanya standing on her porch, his hand resting on her hip. It looked like a picture from someone else's life. That afternoon, I called Leah Brooks, a lawyer a friend had recommended. She specialized in financial misconduct and high-conflict divorces. Her voice was steady, confident, the kind that could cut through chaos. "I need to understand my options," I said. "Has there been infidelity?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "and I can prove it." We met the next day in her office downtown. The walls were lined with degrees and framed newspaper articles, clients she'd helped win settlements that made headlines. I handed her the folder. She flipped through each page, nodding slowly. "This is detailed," she said. "You've been documenting for how long?" "Since I stopped believing him," I said. She looked up, half smiling. "That's usually when the smartest plans begin." Leah explained what would happen next, how we'd file quietly, how we'd freeze joint accounts if necessary, and how Colorado's laws on marital property would work in my favor. When she finished, she asked, "Do you want him to know you're planning this?" "Not yet," I said. Not until it hurts. That night, Mark came home with takeout again. Long day, he said, dropping the bag on the counter. The new solar project's killing me. He looked tired, maybe even sincere. But sincerity means nothing when it comes from a liar. As he unpacked dinner, I caught myself staring at him. He looked so normal, comfortable, familiar. The same man I'd built a life with, the same man who laughed at my jokes, kissed my forehead, and promised forever. I wondered how many times he'd looked at me and thought, she'll never find out. He turned, caught my gaze. What's wrong? I smiled. Just tired. Long day at work. He nodded sympathetically. Yeah, me too. We ate in silence. I matched his tone, his rhythm, his calm. Two actors performing the same scene from opposite scripts. When he went upstairs to shower, I opened my phone and checked the new account. Leah had helped me set up my own checking account, my own future, hidden behind passwords he'd never guess. The balance was still small, but it was mine. The sound of water running upstairs filled the house. I closed the folder, slid it back into the drawer, and took a deep breath. The thing about catching a liar is that once you know, you stop reacting to the lie. You let them keep performing, not out of fear, but because the ending will be better when they write it themselves. And Mark was writing his downfall one Saturday at a time. The next morning, the air felt cleaner somehow, like the storm had already hit, and what came next was just the aftermath. Mark left early again, claiming another meeting in Denver. I kissed him goodbye, but this time I didn't even bother pretending to believe him. As his car disappeared, I walked to my desk, opened the drawer, and stared at the folder of evidence that had quietly rewritten my marriage. By now, I knew everything. Where he went, who she was, how much money he'd siphoned from our accounts to fund whatever fantasy he was living with her. The lies were so ordinary, they almost bored me now. What I needed was precision proof that could do more than break his heart. I wanted something that could break his confidence. So I called Leah, the lawyer. I'm ready to move forward, I said. Then we start today, she replied. We met at her office that afternoon. She wore a navy blazer and had that calm authority of someone who's seen every kind of betrayal and still doesn't flinch. I slid the folder across her desk. Here's everything, I said. Financial records, transfers, and one receipt that ties it all together. She flipped through it quickly, stopping at the signature on the Denver Interior's receipt. This woman, Tanya West, she's not just an affair, is she? I shook my head. She works at Frontier Solar. I think he's using company funds to pay for her place. Leah leaned back in her chair. Then we're not just talking divorce. We're talking financial misconduct, possibly corporate fraud. As in town. I didn't respond, but she saw the flicker of satisfaction in my eyes. I'll need a private investigator's report to corroborate this, she said. And I'll want copies of every transaction that touches the company's name. No confrontations yet. If he suspects, he'll start covering his tracks. I smiled slightly. He already thinks I'm too emotional to notice anything. Good, Leah said. Let him keep thinking that. When I got home, I found Mark on the couch, laptop open, half watching sports. He looked up and grinned like nothing had ever gone wrong. Hey babe, you okay? You look serious. Just a long day, I said. He nodded sympathetically. You should take a break this weekend. Maybe visit your sister or something. That line almost made me laugh. He wanted me gone. Probably so Tanya wouldn't have to share her weekends anymore. Maybe, I said. I'll think about it. Oh. That night, I sat in bed reading while he showered. When he came out, he leaned down to kiss me. I turned my head slightly, and his lips brushed my cheek instead. He didn't notice. Or maybe he didn't care. By Friday, Paul, the investigator, called. I've traced 2 additional accounts, he said. Both under your husband's name, both receiving transfers from your joint savings over the past 3 months. How much? I asked. Roughly 2,000. Okay. I didn't say a word for a few seconds. Can you send the full report? Already did, he said. And Emily, whatever you're planning, make sure you protect yourself first. Guys like this, they panic when the truth catches up. When I hung up, I checked my email. The report was there, time-stamped photos, account numbers, deposit histories. One line stood out. Account used for property rental payments, Denver, Colorado. It was hers. He'd been paying her rent. With my money. I didn't cry. Instead, I opened a spreadsheet and started mapping everything. Dates, withdrawals, transactions, phone records. It looked like something out of a financial audit, except this audit was personal. When he came home that night, he noticed the glow of my laptop screen. Working late again? Yeah, I said without looking up. Budgets never balance themselves. He chuckled. You sound like me. I guess I do. We ate dinner together, roasted chicken and salad. Like any normal couple, the absurdity of it almost made me laugh. Across the table sat a man who thought he was getting away with everything, while I was quietly dismantling his entire story one transaction at a time. That weekend, Leah sent me an encrypted file. Inside was a legal strategy clean, simple, and devastating. She'd already drafted the petition for divorce, including a clause for marital asset concealment and financial fraud. We'll file when the evidence is airtight, she said. I'll also notify HR at Frontier Solar anonymously. Once they open an internal audit, his world will collapse before he even realizes it's over. It was poetic. Really, he'd destroyed our marriage through deception, and now the same skill would undo him professionally. On Sunday morning, he asked, You still mad at me for working weekends? I looked at him and smiled. No. I'm actually proud of how hard you're working. He grinned, completely fooled. That's my girl. He walked out the door with the same confidence he'd always had, the kind of confidence men only have when they think they'll never be caught. I watched from the window as his truck pulled away, then texted Leah. He's gone. Let's move. For the next few hours, I printed every document we needed: bank records, photos, email backups. I signed the initial paperwork and dropped the envelope at Leah's office before heading home. As I pulled into the driveway, the sun was setting over the foothills, painting everything in that strange orange calm that comes right before night. Inside the house, it was silent, peaceful. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at the kitchen counter. For the first time in months, I wasn't afraid of what he might do or say. The fear had burned itself out, leaving only focus. When Mark walked in later, I greeted him like nothing had changed. He talked about his day, about the new Denver expansion, about how proud he was of how well he was balancing work and home. I smiled politely, my hand wrapped around the glass. He didn't notice the calm in my face wasn't affection, it was detachment. By the time he finished talking, I'd already decided what came next. The plan wasn't revenge for revenge's sake. It was justice disguised as quiet civility. And the best part? He was helping me build it one lie at a time. By the next weekend, every smile he gave me looked rehearsed. Every word he said had a tiny delay, like his brain was double-checking which version of reality he'd told me last. It was almost impressive, watching how easily he switched masks. But the funny thing about liars is, they always assume you're still the same person who used to believe them. Saturday morning, he grabbed the grocery bags again. You want me to bring your mom anything? I asked, my voice even. He shook his head. Nah, she said they're good this week. I tilted my head. Didn't you just tell me yesterday her arthritis was acting up? He blinked once, then smiled too fast. Oh yeah, right. I meant they didn't need anything else. You know how she is. I nodded, keeping my face blank. Of course. Drive safe. As soon as the front door shut, I texted Leah and Paul the same message. He's on his way. Paul responded within minutes. I'm already in position. That day, the plan went into motion. Paul followed him, documenting everything with timestamps and photos. Meanwhile, Leah contacted HR at Frontier Solar through an anonymous legal channel, attaching the first batch of financial evidence. If Mark was moving company money into his mistress's rent, it wouldn't stay hidden for long. At noon, Paul called. He's at the townhouse again. Same car, same woman. She's wearing a company badge. Frontier? I asked. Yep, Tanya West. Looks like they don't even bother hiding it anymore. I manned. Keep filming, I said quietly. We'll need this. By late afternoon, Leah forwarded an email she'd received from a contact inside the company. Subject: Possible conflict of interest. Employee investigation requested. Frontier Solar's HR department had officially opened a preliminary inquiry into Mark Cooper for unauthorized expense reimbursements. It was only a matter of time. That evening, when Mark came home, he looked uneasy, not guilty, just tense, like someone who'd felt a small tremor beneath his feet, but couldn't tell where it came from. "Everything okay?" I asked, ladling soup into bowls. He rubbed his jaw. "Yeah, long day. Just a weird email chain at work. HR's doing some random audits again. Pain in the ass." I didn't look up. "That sounds stressful." He shrugged. "It's fine. I've got nothing to worry about." That made me smile, but only on the inside. After dinner, he went upstairs, muttering something about checking emails. I followed quietly a few minutes later and stopped by the office doorway. The light from his laptop screen reflected off his glasses. His shoulders were tight, fingers flying across the keyboard. He didn't notice me. "Mark?" I said softly. He jumped slightly, closed a window too fast. "Hey, babe. Didn't hear you. What are you working on?" He hesitated. "Just cleaning up project files. HR wants everyone to verify expense reports." I leaned against the doorframe. "That sounds serious." "It's just a formality," he said quickly. "They do it every few years." He was lying again. And for the first time, it didn't sting, it almost entertained me. I walked over, kissed his shoulder lightly, and said, "I'm sure they'll find everything spotless." He smiled, unaware of how ironic that sounded. By Monday, Leah called with an update. "Frontier's internal review escalated faster than expected," she said. "They found multiple unauthorized vendor payments tied to his ID. Tanya West's name appears on one of the invoices." "Perfect," I said. "Let them handle the first hit." That afternoon, I forwarded the anonymous evidence package to Frontier's compliance division from a coffee shop downtown. It included every transaction, every receipt, and every timestamp we'd collected. Then I hit send and closed the laptop. On the drive home, I caught myself laughing a quiet, startled sound. Not because it was funny, but because for the first time in months, I felt in control. When Mark walked in that night, his tie was loose and his face looked pale. "Tough day?" I asked. He exhaled heavily. "HR called me in. They're reviewing my reimbursements. Someone must have messed up the accounting." "Someone," I repeated softly. "Yeah, maybe Tanya. She handles some of my project paperwork." "R10, Tanya West?" He froze for half a second, then forced a smile. "How'd you know her last name?" "You mentioned it once," I said lightly. "Months ago." He nodded quickly, buying his own lie. "Right, yeah. She's fine, just inexperienced. Probably a clerical mix-up." "I'm sure it'll sort itself out," I said, pouring wine into his glass. "You've always been careful." He smiled, grateful for the reassurance. But there was sweat on his temple, and his hand trembled slightly when he lifted the glass. The next morning, he left early again. No groceries this time, just a quick kiss on my cheek and a promise to call. He didn't. By noon, Leah sent me a brief text. "Frontier suspended both Mark and Tanya pending investigation. HR meeting set for Friday." That was faster than I expected. That evening, he came home later than usual, face tight with anger. "They're idiots," he snapped, slamming his briefcase on the counter. "They think I used company money for personal use." "Me." I kept my tone calm. "Why would they think that?" "Because someone sent them fake evidence. Emails, receipts. I'm being set up." I met his eyes. "By who?" He hesitated. "Probably someone jealous at work. I'll figure it out." "Of course you will," I said. "You always do." He didn't notice how steady my hands were, or how clear my voice had become. He only saw the version of me he'd built in his head, the trusting wife who never questioned a thing. When he went upstairs to shower, I sat at the dining table and looked around the house. Every picture frame, every piece of furniture, every shared thing now felt like evidence of a performance. The next day, I opened a new document and began drafting something of my own, a letter to HR from an anonymous insider, confirming details of the affair and financial misconduct. I attached copies of the receipts one by one, and before I hit send, I read the last line aloud. Sometimes the truth doesn't need to shout, it just needs to be undeniable. Then I clicked send. Mark's double life had been cleanly exposed, not with screaming, not with confrontation, but with silence, precision, and patience. And as far as he knew, his wife still believed every word he said. By Friday night, the house was quiet in that heavy way it gets before something breaks. Mark came home early for once, freshly shaved, wearing the same shirt he always wore when he wanted to look composed. He didn't mention the HR meeting, and I didn't ask. That was the dance now, two people pretending the floor wasn't already cracking under them. He opened a bottle of wine and said, "Let's have dinner at home tonight. Just us." "Sure," I said, setting the table. "Sounds perfect." He smiled, relieved, like the storm had passed. That's what guilty people do. They mistake silence for forgiveness. At 7 sharp, his mother called. I watched his expression change as he glanced at the screen and hit decline. He tucked the phone away, but I saw the flicker of unease. Maybe she'd heard something. Maybe she was calling to ask why HR had called her husband earlier that day. William Cooper was on the company's board. Over dinner, he said, "So I might have to go to Denver again next week. HR's still sorting out some paperwork." I set down my fork. "With Tanya?" He froze just for a second, then laughed. "No, of course not. She's been suspended. You knew that." "I did," I said. "I just wasn't sure if that changed your plans." He poured himself another glass of wine, the liquid shaking slightly as it hit the glass. "You sound like you don't trust me." I smiled faintly. "Would that surprise you?" His jaw tightened. "Emily, I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this attitude, it's not you. You've been distant, cold. It's like you're looking for reasons to fight." I leaned back in my chair. "You're right. I have been distant." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Look, the stress at work's been bad enough. I can't handle you turning against me too." That line almost made me laugh. Turning against him? He had no idea. Before I could respond, there was a knock at the door. Mark frowned. "You expecting someone?" "No," I said, standing. "But maybe you are." End quote. When I opened the door, my timing couldn't have been better. Linda, his mother, stood there, looking pale and strained. Behind her was William, carrying a folder. "Emily," she said softly, "we need to talk to both of you." Mark's color drained. "Mom? Dad, what are you doing here?" William's voice was calm but sharp. "You want to tell us what's going on before we do?" What do you mean?" Mark stammered. Linda's eyes filled with tears. "HR called me, Mark. They said there's an ongoing investigation. Financial misconduct. Misuse of company funds." Mark's voice rose. "It's a mistake. I'm being framed." William opened the folder and placed it on the table. Inside were printed receipts, emails, and photos, copies of everything I'd sent HR anonymously. He didn't know that part yet, but I did. "Care to explain these?" William said, his voice cold. Mark's eyes darted between us. "This is ridiculous. Tanya handled all the vendor payments, not me." And Linda's voice cracked. "They said the payments went to a personal address in Denver, Mark. A townhouse under your name." Silence hung heavy. I could hear my own heartbeat. He turned toward me, face red, voice shaking. "Did you tell them? Did you do this?" I met his eyes, steady. "Do what? Tell the truth?" "You ruined me," he shouted. "You had no idea what was going on." "Didn't I?" I said quietly. "You've been lying to me for months. To all of us. Every grocery trip, every Saturday, every time you said you were helping your parents, you were funding your mistress with our money." Linda gasped softly, one hand over her mouth. William just stared, expression carved in stone. Mark's chest heaved. "This is insane. You're twisting everything." I took a deep breath, keeping my tone calm. "There's nothing to twist, Mark. The evidence speaks for itself. The receipts, the transfers, the emails, it's all right there. Even your signature." "Alfermine." He slammed his fist against the table. "You set me up." "I didn't have to," I said. "You did that all by yourself." For a long moment, The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Mark looked from me to his parents, eyes wild, like an animal cornered. "You believe her over your own son?" he asked, voice cracking. William didn't hesitate. "I believe the numbers." That silence hit harder than any argument. Mark's shoulders sagged, the fight draining out of him. Linda began to cry, soft and broken. Finally, I spoke again. "I didn't do this to humiliate you. I did it to stop you. You could have told the truth months ago. You could have chosen integrity. Instead, you chose Tanya, and money, and lies." He didn't answer. He just stared at the floor, jaw tight, breathing uneven. When his parents left, they didn't say a word to him. Linda gave me a weak, grateful nod before closing the door behind her. Mark stood there in silence, staring at the empty hallway. "Don't look at me like that," he muttered finally. "You think this makes you better than me?" "No," I said. "Just freer." He glared. "You'll regret this, Emily. You'll regret everything." I smiled faintly. "Maybe. But at least I'll regret it honestly." He stormed past me, grabbed his keys, and slammed the door so hard the frame shook. The sound lingered for a long time after he was gone. I stood there, the house still, the wine half finished on the table. For the first time in years, I didn't feel afraid. I felt empty, but it was the kind of emptiness that comes before rebuilding. Some truths don't explode. They just sit quietly in the room, rearranging everything around them. And once they settle, nothing looks the same again. The following week was strangely quiet. Mark didn't come home for 2 days, and when he finally did, his face looked gray and hollow. He dropped his keys on the counter without saying a word. I was sitting at the dining table, grading papers, pretending not to notice. He poured himself a drink straight whiskey and said flatly, "They fired me." I looked up. "I'm not surprised." He glared at me over the rim of his glass. "They said the evidence was overwhelming. HR, finance, even legal. They think I falsified invoices, redirected reimbursements, used funds for personal housing expenses." He gave a bitter laugh. "As if I'd be that stupid." I didn't respond. He slammed the glass down. "You think this is funny?" "No," I said calmly. "But I think it's fair." His jaw twitched. "They're talking about pressing charges. Do you know what that means? My career, my name, it's over." I closed my laptop. "Maybe it's time you stop worrying about your name and start worrying about your choices." He laughed, but it was cold. "You think you're some kind of hero in this? You think you exposed me and now the world owes you something?" "I don't want anything from you," I said evenly, "except honesty. But you've never been good at that." He walked toward me slowly, his voice low and shaking. "You did this, didn't you? You sent those files. You told them." I didn't look away. Someone had to. For a long second, he just stood there. Then, without another word, he grabbed his jacket and walked out again. That was the last night he ever slept in our house. By Monday, the official termination notice arrived. Frontier Solar had not only fired him, they'd filed a claim with law enforcement for corporate fraud and embezzlement. Tanya West's name was mentioned in the same document. She'd been let go too, and according to the report, she'd already turned in her company laptop. HR suspected she'd cooperated with investigators in exchange for leniency. Leah called me that afternoon. "Emily, the company's moving fast. If Mark doesn't settle privately, he's looking at criminal charges." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Good. Maybe accountability will finally teach him something." She paused. "You sound calm." "I am," I said. I stopped waiting for apologies. Over the next few days, my phone filled with voicemails from Mark, some angry, some pleading. He blamed everyone but himself. He said I'd ruined his life, his reputation, his future. I didn't respond. On Thursday, Leah finalized the divorce filing. The petition included everything: infidelity, financial misconduct, marital asset concealment. It was brutal, clean, and airtight. She smiled when she handed me the papers. "You'll come out of this with most of the assets. He has no leverage left." "Good," I said, "because I'm done playing defense." The hearing date was set for 2 weeks later. That weekend, Linda came by. She looked 10 years older, her face drawn, her voice shaky. Emily, I had no idea. None. I can't believe he would. I stopped her gently. You don't have to defend him. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm so sorry for what he did to you. To all of us. I managed a small smile. You were never the problem, Linda. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. He's been calling us non-stop. His father won't take his calls. I think he's starting to realize what he's lost. For a moment, I felt a flicker of pity. Then I remembered the townhouse, the lies, the months of manipulation. Pity turned to something colder clarity. By Monday, the news spread quietly through the community. Someone leaked the HR report to a local business blog. The headline was blunt. Frontier solar engineer fired amid embezzlement scandal. There was no need to name Tanya. Everyone already knew. At the grocery store, people who used to smile politely now avoided eye contact. His coworkers stopped calling. Mutual friends stopped texting. The man who once prided himself on being respected was now invisible in the same town where he used to be admired. Leah called again. The judge reviewed the case. With the evidence and his termination, your settlement's looking strong. You'll keep the house and 70% of joint assets. EX Khaled. Thank you. She hesitated, then asked, Do you want alimony? I shook my head. No, I just want peace. That night, I got one last message from Mark. No anger this time. No blame, just exhaustion. You got what you wanted. I hope it was worth it. I stared at it for a long time before replying. It wasn't what I wanted, but it's what you earned. I didn't hear from him again. A week later, the divorce was finalized. I stood outside the courthouse with the wind tugging at my coat and felt something I hadn't in months: lightness. Leah walked beside me, smiling. You handled this better than most. I wasn't trying to win, I said. I was trying to stop losing. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The neighborhood was quiet, the air crisp. I looked at the garden, our garden, technically, and realized it was mine now, all of it. No more pretending. No more silence. Just peace. The next morning, Linda dropped by again with a small box. He left this in the garage, she said. Inside was a silver bracelet I'd given him years ago. The inscription read, For better or worse. I smiled faintly. Looks like we reached the worse. She managed a sad laugh. You're stronger than I thought, Emily. Stronger than I used to be, I said. As she left, I stood in the doorway for a while, the sunlight catching the edge of the bracelet in my hand. It no longer felt like a memory. It felt like evidence of survival. The chaos had burned itself out. And from what was left, I could finally see something steady again. Freedom, not as revenge, but as release. For the first time in years, I wasn't the woman he betrayed. I was the woman who saw it all, endured it, and still walked out standing tall. The silence after the storm didn't feel empty, it felt clean. For weeks, I'd been living inside tension so thick it filled every room. Now, it was gone. The house finally breathed again. I started waking up early, before sunrise, sitting by the window with a mug of coffee while the world outside turned gold. It was the first time in years that mornings didn't begin with a lie. The divorce settlement came through officially that Monday. The house, the savings, and my consulting practice, all mine. Leah sent me a short text. Congratulations, you're free. Free. It was such a small word for something that took so much to earn. I spent the next few weeks putting things back together, but not the way they used to be. I sold Mark's car, donated most of his clothes, and turned his office into a study for myself. The desk by the window became my new workspace. It was strange how reclaiming a room could feel like reclaiming oxygen. When Linda stopped by one afternoon, she stood quietly in the doorway. You did it, she said softly. I smiled. I just told the truth. She nodded, looking around. You know, I never realized how peaceful this house could feel. When he lived here, it always felt like walking on glass. I hesitated before saying, It still feels strange without him, but it's the good kind of strange. She gave a small, understanding smile. You don't owe him bitterness, Emily. You've already won. That night, I thought about those words. Winning didn't feel like revenge. It felt like peace that didn't need explanation. Over the next few months, I began rebuilding not just my life, but my purpose. I'd always been good with numbers. Financial planning was second nature to me. But now, it meant something different. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping women who were going through financial abuse and divorce learn to manage their money. What began as a few hours a week soon became a structured program. I called it the Cooper Financial Advocacy. The irony of keeping his name wasn't lost on me, but it also didn't bother me. That name would now stand for something honest. One evening after a seminar, a young woman approached me. Her hands shook as she held her papers. "My husband emptied our joint account," she whispered. "He said I couldn't survive without him." I looked her in the eye and said, "Then it's time to prove him wrong." She nodded slowly, tears forming, but behind them I saw a spark. I knew that look. It was the exact one I'd had months ago when I realized calm didn't mean weakness. It meant strategy. The shelter offered me a permanent position to lead financial recovery programs. I accepted without hesitation. It wasn't glamorous, but it mattered. Every time I sat across from another woman learning how to open her first account, how to budget, how to reclaim what was hers, I felt the weight of purpose again. Linda visited occasionally with small gestures, homemade soup, flowers, or a quiet afternoon chat. The guilt in her eyes had faded, replaced by something else: respect. One afternoon she said softly, "I used to think you'd crumble without him, but you didn't. You built something better." I smiled. Sometimes destruction clears the space you need to rebuild. She nodded, her voice trembling. "Mark's staying with a friend in Denver. He lost everything. The townhouse, his job. Tanya left him too." I didn't gloat. I just took a slow breath. Maybe now he understands what truth costs when you keep avoiding it. She reached out, squeezed my hand. "He asked me to tell you he's sorry." I met her gaze calmly. "Then tell him I hope he finds peace. I already have." After she left, I sat at my desk by the window again. The evening light slanted across the hardwood floor, the same floor where we'd once fought, laughed, and lied. It was all part of a story that had finally found its ending. I opened my laptop, scrolled through photos of the women who'd attended my first workshop, their smiles uncertain but growing. That was the quiet justice I wanted, the kind that didn't humiliate, only healed. As spring turned into summer, the garden outside bloomed brighter than it ever had. I planted new things: lavender, roses, and wild sunflowers. Every morning, their colors caught the light in a way that reminded me life didn't stop after betrayal. It just learned to bloom differently. One Saturday, while I was watering the plants, a familiar car slowed near the house. Mark. He didn't stop, just looked at me through the open window before driving on. For a second, our eyes met, and I saw it, the realization that the woman he thought would break had become someone he couldn't even approach anymore. I didn't wave. I didn't need to. Some messages are better delivered in silence. That evening, Linda texted me again. "He saw you today. He said you looked happy." I typed back, "That's because I am." When I went back outside, the air smelled of wet earth and new beginnings. The wind moved through the trees softly, almost like applause. There was no victory dance, no dramatic ending, just calm. The kind of calm that comes when everything false has fallen away and all that's left is truth. In that quiet, I realized something simple but profound. The best revenge isn't the fall of the person who hurt you, it's the rise of the person they underestimated. And I had risen. Not loud, not angry, just steady, grounded, and free. A year passed faster than I expected. Life had settled into a rhythm that didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like living. My mornings started with quiet coffee on the porch and ended with calls from women across the state asking for help rebuilding their lives after betrayal. The Cooper Financial Advocacy had grown beyond anything I'd imagined. It wasn't just a program anymore, it was a network. Every week, new faces came through the door. Women with stories that sounded too familiar: lost savings, manipulative spouses, emotional gaslighting disguised as love. I listened, guided, and watched them slowly reclaim what they thought was gone forever: confidence. Justice had become something quieter to me. It wasn't about public humiliation or grand revenge anymore. It was about watching truth do its work in silence. One Wednesday afternoon, while I was sorting through workshop materials, Linda stopped by again. She looked better this time, healthier, lighter somehow. She placed a folder on my desk. You might want to see this. Inside were the final reports from Frontier Solar's case. Mark had pleaded guilty to reduced charges, embezzlement, falsifying records. The company recovered part of the losses, but he was banned from working in finance again. He was now working maintenance at a logistics warehouse in Aurora. I closed the folder and said softly, "That sounds about right." Linda hesitated. "He asked me to tell you something." I looked up, waiting. "He said you were right. About everything. That you were the only person who ever really saw him for who he was, and he hates that you still won." I smiled faintly. "It's not about winning, Linda. It's about ending." She nodded, eyes wet. "He's been sober for 3 months. Maybe losing everything finally woke him up." "Sometimes losing is the only thing that does," I said. She left quietly, and I sat there for a long time, staring out the window. Outside, the sun was setting over the Rockies, casting long gold lines across the glass. There was a time I would have given anything for him to apologize. Now I didn't need it. That night, I took a walk through downtown Boulder. The air was crisp, and the lights from the shops flickered against the pavement. I passed a couple arguing quietly on the corner, his voice sharp, hers shaking. For a moment, I saw my old self in her eyes. The woman who used to explain away red flags as misunderstandings. The woman who believed love could fix what truth had already broken. I walked on, not with anger, but with clarity. The next morning, an invitation arrived in my inbox from a local university. They wanted me to give a guest lecture on financial empowerment and emotional resilience. The title they proposed made me laugh softly. When Betrayal Builds You. Or. Standing at that podium a week later, I looked out at a room full of students, some curious, some skeptical, most just quietly listening. I started simply, "I used to believe betrayal destroys people, but what I've learned is that it just removes what was false. What's left is what you build afterward, and that's where your real life starts." After the talk, a young woman approached me with tears in her eyes. "My mom's going through the same thing you described," she said. "She thinks she's weak for staying too long." I smiled gently. "Tell her she's not weak. She just needed time to remember who she was." That night, when I got home, the house was dark except for the soft glow from the porch lamp. I walked to the garden, the one that had once been my escape, and looked at how much it had changed. The lavender had spread, the roses were fuller, and a small robin had built a nest in the oak tree near the gate. Everything had found a way to rebuild, even after being torn apart. As I watered the plants, a car slowed on the street again. I didn't turn around this time. I didn't need to. The sound of that old engine was familiar, and so was the feeling that followed detachment, not fear. The car lingered for a moment, then drove away. When I went back inside, I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. There was a new email from a national nonprofit asking if I'd consider expanding the Cooper Advocacy Program to other states. I stared at it for a long time, then typed a simple reply. "Yes. Let's help more women rebuild." I hit send. Outside, the night was quiet except for the distant hum of cars and the faint sound of wind against the windows. For once, that quiet didn't feel empty, it felt earned. As I got ready for bed, I caught my reflection in the mirror. Not the same woman who once waited for her husband to come home from visiting his parents. Not the woman who doubted her instincts or begged for honesty. This woman was calm, certain, and whole. I turned off the lights and whispered to myself, "He said he was visiting his parents every week, but what I saw that day changed everything." And it did. Because that day, I didn't just discover betrayal, I discovered truth. And the truth didn't destroy me, it freed me. It was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, my peace, and my power. The best revenge isn't destruction. It's rebuilding so beautifully that no one recognizes the ruins anymore. And in the stillness of that night, I realized my quiet revenge was complete. If you love cheating stories, revenge stories, or real tales of husband betrayal that end in strength instead of bitterness, hit subscribe and leave a comment below. Tell me where you're watching from. I read every story, and someone out there might need to hear yours too.